You are live.
Thank you. So this is House Rules meeting on Thursday, January 26th at 12 p.m. So we are picking up a conversation that the House Rules Committee started last biennium coming out of COVID, looking at some of the things that we did to accommodate members and support members during the pandemic. And we did some surveys, and one of the themes that we wanted to continue the conversation on is remote voting. So as a reminder to everyone, currently there is no remote voting happening. We have gone back to our custom and practice of members being able to participate in a committee hearing remotely, but they do not count towards a quorum and they are not permitted to vote. So in picking this conversation back up, what I would love to start is just to go around the table and talk about what are some criteria that you think we should to talk about and discuss making permissible to vote remotely. For me, I'll start here, and folks can definitely put their opinions on the table. I would like to start this as a pilot and have us revisit it sometime in March to see how it's going, whatever we decide. And I'd like to keep it to committees and not the floor. But again, that's me starting off, and I'm happy to turn it to somewhere around the table to start getting the feedback going. So I'm looking, who wants to go first?
Sure. So I really like the idea of a pilot so that we can gather some real world experience and then kind of step back and see how it works and revisit it. In my mind right now, it would be great to start this pilot and limit it to committee only. I think remote voting and remote participation on floor is a whole nother can of worms. But to try it out in committee, in my mind, I'd be interested in pretty clear parameters so that we're not moving in the direction of, just turning committees into some sort of hybrid. I'm not quite ready to view the State House as a hybrid workplace yet. I think that we get our work done a lot better in person. I think it's kind of the stuff of our work. And so parameters like, with your chair's permission, if you're quarantining from COVID, if you need to care for, someone in your family who's ill or recovering from surgery or something. And then if you're sick yourself, because I do think that we go down a slippery slope if we're encouraging or requiring people to be here when they're ill, because I think we've all learned that the State House is a rather unique petri dish. And I don't think it's great to be in a place where we're expecting people to show up here when they're sick. So that's just right off the top, that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Good. All right, we're good. We'll go around maybe the table and around this way.
Yeah. Sure. Just a couple of initial reactions, because I think that the potential at some point of looking at some mechanism or some allowances for remote voting is not a bad discussion to have. And I know that we're not bound by anything that a past rules committee, the speaker may have said, even if some of us are the same people, but as a continued thing. My understanding had been that there was a sort of an idea out there that we were going to do 1 year of back to status quo so that everybody would experience that before making any potential changes to the long-term status quo. So we were going to go back to a, pre-COVID experience for a year of a session before making changes. And that to me still makes a lot of sense. The other thing that I would think we would want to do as kind of a pre-pilot or part of a pilot as we start looking that way is to actually get the existing data, if you will. How many people in each committee how many times has there been remote participation? That's something we could easily track and find out, and I would think would be of significant value in assessing You know, if it's a very small number, then that makes a difference versus a lot. And we should gather that before making a change. One might assume, but it may not be accurate, that if people were able to vote remotely, that might sort of make them feel more able to, you know, if they know they can't vote, they may be making more of an effort to make other arrangements for the needs in order to be here. But still, I still think it would be a useful, you know, background point of data before making a change.
Thank you. Casey?
I would just, I'm cautious on voting remotely in committee. We've always had the ability to call in and we can participate, but voting remotely, I think Kath, you said it pretty good. We do a lot of our work in the building, and that's kind of where I see like one of the biggest things during COVID when we were at home is just missing those connections. And I feel like we're missing the connections with people that are in the committee, and you know, not if it, you know, I feel like everyone would make their best judgment, but if it became like a norm where it can be, you can just, oh, I can just vote remotely, I don't want to come in. It's not really doing the job of what you're supposed to be, you know, what you have signed up for and you got elected to do. So that's kind of where my caution comes. And I think Ann hit on some really good points about how we were talking about doing a full year before we made any changes to that. So thanks.
No, I'd have to agree with that. Also, you know, we have to realize that we are different. Like, we are a legislative body that's elected by our citizenry, who the expectation is that we come here and we do our job. So it's not like I can, you know, do remote work. That's not what this job is about, because I think everybody understands that our best work is done when I can look directly across the table at a representative and get my point across instead of looking at the Hollywood squares with people up there. Additionally, we have a member that is out, and when you're looking this way, you forget they're there. They're up on the screen, but you don't see them. I forget that the member's not even in the room with us. So I think you get lost when you're, you know, you're not even involved in the conversation, which she really wasn't this morning too much. And I don't have an issue if they have to stay and they can, you know, participate remotely, but I am not at all there for voting. I think that is a custom and a practice that this legislative body has had since our inception. And barring COVID, which was an emergency situation, you know, and you know, the state of emergency declared by the governor, I'm not there yet.
Actually, I tend to agree with everything that has been said. I think we do our best work when we're in person together. And I appreciate being able to Zoom in to participate, but at this point, I think it would be good to not be voting remotely. I'm glad we're only talking about it being a committee. Yeah. But I think policy should err on the side of having us be here in the building.
Definitely share the sentiment of doing our best work in person, and also hoping for the flexibility and safety around health as well as travel for folks to be able to participate as much as possible in committee and making sure that they're doing right by their constituents. I think if I'm hearing the concern from others, it's almost this consistent use of remote voting or not coming in to participate in committee at all and only being online. So I would offer this always being a conversation, of course, between the committee member and their chair to understand what those agreements are and what the expectations are for participation moving forward. But would appreciate the opportunity for voting remotely in committee and agree to not extend it to the floor because that was and will be chaotic. And also hearing from members within our own caucus, there is this feeling of, because I want to show up, I want to be present. Right now, I'm feeling the need to show up while I am sick because I want to be able to participate in committee. And I think that puts others at a higher risk that we don't want to see happening.
I would just add on, actually, I have a personal example of this. We've been working obviously on budget adjustment, and my committee chair asked me to work on a piece of language, and I've been solo parenting this week. I have a 3 and a 7-year-old, and we did not anticipate there'd be a snowstorm that came through. My spouse was in Boston trying to make it back last night. And so we were trying to vote out our letter, straw poll, of course, in committee this morning. And if I had not been, if my wife hadn't made it back through the storm, driving at 35 miles an hour all the way back from Boston last night because of the pressure of me having to be down here to try to really follow through with my task of reporting out on the work I had done, and then being able to participate in the straw poll, with our current rules, I would not have been able to do that. So there's continuity of this. Well, to be able to vote, to vote on. Well, straw. I'm just saying that this will play out differently. Let me finish it if I can.
Yeah, sorry, no. You asked.
Just playing out this work of, we do a lot of work, right? Due diligence. And I have a very high work ethic of myself and I show up whenever I can. And yet I have a 3 and a 7-year-old, and sometimes childcare gets closed and sometimes a kid gets sick and you don't get notice on that. You don't get notice on a storm necessarily. So having that ability to honor the fact that most of us, if not all of us, I hope, have a high work ethic and want to show up and do this work in person, but occasionally life happens, and having that ability to follow through with our work and to be able to finish the piece of work, which in this case was being able to participate in the final decision on, again, using budget adjustment as an example, I would have been precluded from that if I had to stay home with my kids if today was a snow day in Burlington, because my spouse could not make it back in time. So I think this is an opportunity to think about accessibility of this job for folks who have families and young kids, and unexpected things happen, of course, even outside of the pandemic, but also physical accessibility. We have members with physical limitations, and getting through these storms, and with the increase of what's looking like our storms with ice and snow and all sorts of things, there's a physical safety component. So I think it's a time for us to think about, within reasonableness with certain criteria, making sure this job is accessible for folks. And I would hope that we could start leaning in that direction and consider this pilot and see how it plays out, because it'll make it a lot easier for people like me to be able to run for office and be here and represent our communities if we have that a reflection of real life.
Thank you. So don't want to repeat what everyone else has said, but I will just say I acknowledge and celebrate the ability for us to be in person. And we'll always do that because I do think we do our best work here. But there is a reality to life. And I would just say we are often talking about COVID being in the past, and I don't think it's completely in the past. In fact, right now, if you're diagnosed with COVID, the process is you need to isolate for 5 days and then wear a mask for 5 days. So right there is, we're not able to go back to status quo until that has happened. And I'll just say, I recognize the sentiment, but I don't remember us making a decision about a 1 year in any form going back to status quo. And even if we did, I would say we're probably not in status quo yet. And I am very mindful of the accessibility challenges for many members. And one of the reasons I like this idea of a pilot is so that we can work on best practice for us over time. I just want to say that I've talked to an awful lot of members here in this building, and the every single person I talk to feels a deep dedication to the work that they were elected to do in this building. And I deeply believe that no one is going to take advantage of an ability to vote remotely in committee. And I, of course, will just say I agree. Committee is the only thing I'm talking about here, not floor. And so because of that dedication, I also worry a little, I think it was Representative Small who mentioned it, that people feel so dedicated that they will come in and we, you know, when they're ill, and that's probably not good for them or anyone else in this building because they want to vote. The last thing I'll just say is that we are not ever going to be back to what we were prior to COVID because we now know our ventilation system is not up to par and we have room restrictions that don't allow the number of people in the room that we had prior to COVID. And so I welcome the opportunity for when people are ill, being able to do a pilot program, see how it works out. I'll also just say one more thing. Remote participation statistics today, if we look and ask, that is, you know, great to hear, but people have always been able to participate if they couldn't be in for lots of reasons beyond just being ill. So that really won't tell us everything that we need to know if we look at that. So that's essentially it. Thanks.
Go ahead.
Well, I think I'm last. It means that I can only be repetitive, probably.
Me too.
I
So
hate to do that, but I can support a trial of voting remotely. I think I would prefer to see really specific parameters. One of the lessons COVID has taught us is it's not just COVID that we should be concerned about. I think there should be any illness. You have the flu, you have a really bad cold, you shouldn't be in here, and it'd be really good to have the participation. I too see a real distinction between voting remotely in committee and voting remotely on the floor. I don't think we're ready to go there. I'm strangely resistant to calling this a pilot, though. I don't know why, because essentially we would be setting an end date, and presumably we would be hearing from committee chairs about how things were going. But I can see under very strict parameters, we don't want it to be arbitrary, just based on the whim of a chair, but we also want some pretty clear parameters and guidelines about what's okay. I think I would probably extend it not just to an infectious disease, but if you're hospitalized for a time. But I certainly wouldn't want to see a member where, oh, they never come in, they're always on the screen, just because it's more convenient for whatever reason. I would hate to see that, because I think that member they're doing their constituents a disservice, in my opinion, and not being as effective as they could.
I just ask a question to clarify.
Sure.
Sometime around the beginning of the year, there's been at least informal references, I think, from the speaker about a pilot involving a couple of committees. Is that your meaning of the term pilot now, or is it changed?
For this,
Yeah, for the current
for
discussion.
voting,
For voting, for voting in committees.
it would be for all committees with a clear set of criteria,
Okay.
only for committees, not chamber. Put this out as a starting point for us to work from.
And an end date.
And yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that was very challenging last biennium, but I think we worked really hard and well together, was, you know, we slowly came back. We were really careful, methodical about how we came back to the building or when we needed masks. And so we've been flexible this time, responding to where we are with what's happening, you know, with COVID and in the building. And so I think we can continue to do that as we learn on how things work. On your hand? Yeah.
I did, because I just am having these deep philosophical thoughts. As somebody who's served about half my time in the building and half my time remotely, Casey and I think it's about a 50-50 split. No doubt that I'm doing better work, serving my constituents better, and able to be more effective when I'm here in the building. But, as we all know, even though the State House is a really unique workplace, we're also living in a world where the concept of a workplace is evolving really rapidly. And of all places, I wouldn't want to see the people's house get left in the dust in terms of people being able to serve, inclusion, equity. And I'm glad we're having this conversation, because I think it's going to be really important that we think going forward about how we can make sure that all voices are represented here and all communities are represented here. And over time, I think we're going to need to, think hard about that.
Yeah. Well, and it's timely that we're having this conversation, since just last week or 2 weeks ago, we voted to give municipalities the flexibility, right? About how they govern in a hybrid model, in person or remotely. So, yeah, it's timely for us, given that we just had that conversation. Just giving other members a chance. Any other thoughts or feedback?
Just had my recollection that it's similar to Emily's in terms of time frame. We said we're going to come back. We're going to not do anything drastically changing, but I don't think we set any kind of a time frame to make a decision to try something else. And remember a year we discussed it.
Okay, well, so we have diversity of opinions around the table, which is good. So I think the question is, are there any criteria that's very narrow that people would feel comfortable with trying out on a temporary basis? Just, COVID and sick family? Just, again, keeping the conversation going.
COVID quarantine, caring for a sick family member, your own illness, I would think. Your own illness.
Oh, your own.
You're sick. And then, childcare emergencies. Those are, I'll just toss that one out there. I don't know if I'm going too far, but I've been where Emma is many times. And if your kiddos are home and you don't have anybody to watch them, there's not a whole lot you can do. And then I don't know about storms. I don't know how you would. I don't even how you even go there with the weather stuff.
Yeah.
Not that we shouldn't, I just don't know. I don't know what criteria you use.
Right. No, I think if we do come to some sort of very short list, I think it needs to be very, very narrow and very focused. Go ahead.
I don't support it at this time, but I do want to say that if there is a decision that would allow for that it's conceptually permitted for some circumstances to vote remotely, then I think we would have to keep in mind that we did include in our rules disability accommodations. And if we are saying it's possible to vote remotely for any reason, we would have to then also be sure to include, or if it's a disability accommodation.
Thoughts?
If we're going to mention COVID, I think including other infectious diseases, that is a good idea. Having enjoyed a bout of COVID, I have to say, if I had to have the same COVID infection or a bad cold, I'll go with the COVID because some of these the flu can also kill you, and colds can be really debilitating for weeks and weeks. So I'm advocating for not just COVID being on the list.
Yep. All right, well, I know that the invite said an hour, but we've been doing a half hour, and it seems like we need to maybe take a break and have some more conversations and talk to our caucus members about what this could look like. I did connect with our committee chairs about this just to get a sense. What I heard back, there wasn't that many cases of people participating remotely, but I'm happy to find out and get a little bit more background and share that with you all. so that we can get a sense of the scope. Like I said, I think even though it's a very open, open for remote participation, in those cases, those conversations have happened about, I'm quarantining, I have to stay, so I think we can get, it's not going to be perfect, but we can get a picture of what's happening so far. Yeah. Jack, go
Do you
ahead.
have a time frame in mind for a trial period?
I would do something like a month, maybe. Oh, again,
Just
open to
just wondering
interpretation. I feel
what
like,
you had in mind.
yeah, something that's long enough for us to actually get hopeful feedback and data from, Yeah. I think if we did something like a week, it wouldn't be helpful. Right?
Right. Well, it probably needs to be long enough that bills are actually moving out of the
Sure.
committee. And that things are getting more intense.
We'll just pilot it during crossover. Yes, and I do know, I think the Senate has made some changes in their rules, and they're also doing a pilot around town, up to the town meeting. So we wouldn't be the only ones using sort of a trial period to see how things work out. And can happy to talk with the pro tem on how theirs is going as well. Okay. All right, so why don't we adjourn for today, and then we'll try to get a meeting early next week to continue the conversation. I don't want this to lag for too long, and we have other items we want to talk about. So keep noodling. We'll get some more information, and we'll come back early next week. Okay.